Yo, what up, everybody? This is Nothing But Bangers, aka MBB, aka Bangers, aka I've got some spicy deck list and some new takes on decks that are already classics and top tier, but you can check them out. Let me know what you think about these decks. Let me know which one is your favorite, or hey, maybe which one am I missing? What deck am I missing from this video? Again, I will be releasing new power rankings as soon as the weekend is kind of finished up, so stay tuned for that as well. But let's get to these deck lists. Alright, so starting with the tried and true Mewtwo Gardevoir list, this is my take on the latest Mewtwo Gardevoir list that I think is probably one of the more optimal lists that you will find. Again, you'll notice double slab. You will also notice the inclusion of a card like Blue over a card like Giovanni. That is strictly for the mirror match. And again, I do think that, yes, there are going to be times where you're going to miss Giovanni, but I think that there's just other cards that you probably are going to be wanting to play. No red card in this list as well, which is kind of crazy to say, especially in a tournament setting. But you will notice that I do include Mew EX as well as Jinx. Jinx is going to be there to try to counter some of these Gyarados decks, and obviously the grass decks with Serperior. And it's also a one prizer that can help, prizes be a little bit more, different from your opponent. But again, it's also going to shine in matchups that you may not see coming. Mew is just Mew. It's going to be able to steal some games. It's going to be able to have some big threat potential, especially in the mirror. And then when you take a look at the other trainers and supporters, you'll notice that I am playing 1 X speed, 1 leaf. That is to help pivot, maybe Gardevoir is in the active for whatever reason. Yeah, I just leaf it out, or even a Mewtwo EX. So you can kind of see some test stands here. Shout out to Pokemon Meta. Again, probably the best resource for building decks and then kind of seeing some test hands. But again, the deck just does what it's supposed to. I mean, there's a reason why it's one of the most popular decks, every tournament, right? And it only got better with the cards that they gave it in this set. So, all right, let's get to the next deck. All right, so the next deck is going to be my updated take on Pikachu. This is going to be a Raichu variant, and I do think that this variant has a lot of advantages in the current, form of the meta. So just to kind of run through it, I am playing the new Pikachu that can deal potentially 30 damage, maybe as much as 50 damage to Pokemon that are weak to electric. Also, if you have Giovanni, it can deal 60 damage. So this has a pretty high ceiling. The Raichu, you can deal 140, and then when you talk about using Giovanni, if you didn't have to use Surge, it can deal 150. Very strong finisher. And then the obvious Pikachu EX. Then a couple of additions that are from the new set as well. Electabuzz, being able to snipe and finish Pokemon off is really good in the mirror, and it can be game-changing if you talk about putting 40 damage on something like a Gyarados and getting it ready to get knocked out by maybe a Raichu and so on. So still a really good card. Think of it as like a budget version, kind of not a budget version, but an alternative to Zebstrika. So you're not having to play stage 1s, additional stage 1s. And then Dedenne taking the place of Pinch. Again, just filling that same role of potential Paralyze. And it's at a really cheap cost. The other cards that you see in the deck, Double Surge, just trying to make sure that you can have that Raichu when you need it. And then no Leaf, pretty much the same standard trainers. Obviously, one thing that may stand out to some people is the addition, or maybe only having 1 Giovanni. Some people might play 2. But this would be my go-to list if I was playing Raichu heading into this first tournament weekend with the new Mythical Island set. Then you can see some of these test hands. Any hand that you're opening with Pikachu EX, I feel pretty good about life. Again, you're not going to get the perfect hand every time, but just kind of shuffling you through these hands, just showing you how the deck might potentially open. So very strong deck. Pikachu is still going to be very good. So keep that in mind. It's not dead or anything like that. It's still very much alive. And this is just one variant. There may be somebody that actually figures out Galvantula. I don't know how I feel about it yet. It's interesting, right? Galvantula, maybe you can go ahead and get an early KO with Pikachu EX and then trap something with Galvantula. I don't know. That's a pretty solid strategy, but again, very tough to say. All right, another deck that you might see a lot of, maybe you want to pilot yourself. This is going to be my take on the Exeggutor Serperior Celebi deck. It might be a lot going on in the deck, and some people are probably going to just say, hey, I don't want to play Exeggutor, but I think Exeggutor is one of the best, cards that you can play if you go first, and that's kind of the big reason why I play it. But again, if you have the room for the second Execute, I mean, it might be worth it as well. Because again, when you take a look at the basics, you're playing five, five basics here. But you might be able to up it to 6 if you can find something else to cut. But you'll notice double Serperior line, and then double Celebi EX, double Erica, also, and then 1 Leaf, 1 X Speed, 1 Sabrina. Everything else pretty standard. But I do like this deck. I think that it has a lot of good plays. I think it has a lot of good lines. The biggest thing is you're playing a stage 2. So the games where you're not able to get Serperior online, hopefully Celebi and Exeggutor can kind of carry. But, again, it does have a little bit of an issue, obviously, with fire decks. But, hey, who knows how many fire decks we're going to see. I do have a couple of fire decks lined up for the end of this video as well. But, again, very strong deck. And you may just want to skip Exeggutor, and that's fine. But, again, I think Exeggutor is really, really good, even in decks like this. So here is a new dark variant that I think you're going to see a lot of in different forms. I think this actually might have already won an event, this exact card list. But this is going to have Scolipede along with Weezing. And even though you're only playing Weezing, it still does run double Koga, which, hey, maybe that's something that you might want to play around with, but I do think double Koga is just really, really good. I wouldn't necessarily want to cut it. And then you'll notice it's also playing the new Tauros. Now with Tauros, again, because the other attacks are pretty cheap, and you have, you should have time to set it up and passively build it up while you're, pressuring with the other Pokemon, or maybe soaking damage on the other Pokemon. That Tauros can be game winning. It's going to finish a lot of games. But again, double Leaf, so that way you can pivot in and out of the active spot, especially with most of these things having 2 retreat costs, a lot of them having 2 or more retreat costs. And then you got double Koga, double Pokeball, and 1 Sabrina. The weirdest thing about this deck is only 1 item card. Not something that you see a lot of in Pokemon Pocket right now. But again, just kind of going through some of these hands, you can kind of see how it looks when you shuffle up some of these hands. Pretty solid openers, and again, really solid Mewtwo matchup, and that's going to be one of the biggest appeals of this deck. All right, so another dark deck that you might see, and this is basically going to be very similar, very identical to the Wigglytuff Arbok Weezing decks that we saw. And instead of playing Wigglytuff, you're just playing 1 Tauros and then opening up the room for 1 more trainer. But you got your 2-in-2 lineup of Weezing and Arbok lines. You've got double Koga, double Sabrina, and double Leaf to help pivot in and out of the active spot. Because again, that will be nice for your Arbok and your Tauros. But hey, maybe you want to squeeze 1 more Tauros in there instead of only having 1. But again, with 5 basics, that's still pretty solid. The X speed can help you in the turns that you're playing a supporter already. Maybe you're already playing, maybe you're already playing a research. Maybe you're playing a Sabrina and you want to pivot out of the active with X speed, and so on. So again, really solid deck, especially again into Mewtwo. And hey, I mean, Tauros might help that Pikachu matchup even a little bit more, right? If you can knock out a Pikachu with Tauros and then trap something with Arbok, you might have a chance to win that game even against a deck like Pikachu. And again, if you're able to go toe-to-toe with Pikachu and Mewtwo, it's usually the sign of a pretty good deck. Now, how does the grass matchup fare? Well, hey, it's just it is kind of hit and miss. But obviously, if you can chip damage on the Celebi to set it up for Tauros, you can get that knockout. But 2 heads on your Arbok will be game losing for Celebi EX, so that's something to keep an eye on. But again, really solid deck. I'm not sure which dark deck I like more. I kind of lean more towards this one since it doesn't play a stage 2 and it has a couple of different winning lines. But again, I do think that both dark decks are still very strong and very good, especially in a meta that we're probably going to see a lot of Mewtwo. All right, let's get to the water decks now. This is a water deck that is going to focus on using Vaporeon to move energies around and hopefully have Gyarados as your finisher. Obviously, you have the chance to get donks with this Articuno and Misty. And Misty is going to be a card that, whenever you're flipping heads, you're probably winning those games, right? Like, that's the thing that you got to think about. If your opponent's flipping heads, they're probably winning the game, right? So, that's just something that, hey, it's just a part of the game. But, the double Gyarados line, the double Eevee and Vaporeon, and then the single Articuno. And then when you take a look at the trainers, you do have double Giovanni there to help make your math right for knocking out things like Mewtwo EX with your Gyarados. And then you have Leaf and XP to help pivot out of the active spot. And, that might be something you might want to change. You might take out one Giovanni for one Leaf. I don't know. That's your thing. You might even just take out the XP for another Leaf. The only thing I don't like about that is that so many supporters in the deck. But again, I do think that this deck is very interesting. And hey, the first deck that you got to start thinking about beating right now is Mewtwo, and then obviously Celebi, and then Pikachu EX as well. If you can go toe-to-toe with 2 out of those 3 decks, you should feel pretty good. And then the water against fire matchup should be pretty solid unless, bad things happen, right? So again, I think this is a very solid deck. Obviously, you see that Misty Donk potential right there in that hand. There you see a Eevee, and that's the worst part of the deck, right? Every deck that's playing Vaporeon, Eevee is the weakest part of the deck. Like, if you don't draw another basic, you're just sitting there like, please, Eevee, just don't get knocked out. And, hey, if you only draw Magikarp, that also is a bit of a problem too, even though it can attack and get out of the active spot. But again, Eevee's the worst part of this deck most of the time. And, hey, you're going to lose games that you draw Eevee, and that's the only Pokemon you draw for your first 2 or 3 turns sometimes. And hopefully that doesn't happen very often, because obviously the odds of that are pretty low. But again, it's Pokemon, it's going to happen. So the last water deck that I'll talk about is another take on Gyarados. This one is playing Gyarados, it's not playing Gyarados, it's playing Vaporeon. So you've got Vaporeon, Starmie, and Articuno. This is the deck that I was very anxious to try, and it played just how I thought it would, right? The games that I only saw Eevee, it felt really bad, right? The games that I just played Eevee and I couldn't find Vaporeon felt pretty bad, or I only had Eevee. But again, like, Starmie EX is going to carry sometimes, right? And then the high roll, potential with Articuno and Misty is going to win some games on its own too. This deck is at its best when it has Vaporeon on the bench and Starmie's in the active with 2 energies, and you're able to hit for 90 and then retreat, move the energies around. That's when this deck is at its best. So hopefully you can set up those scenarios. I did play Leaf in this deck as well to help make getting Vaporeon out of the active spot a little bit more manageable, as well as the Articuno. But again, I like that 1-in-1 split, 1 X speed, 1 Leaf. So here are some test hands really quickly. So you can kind of see that, right? Starmie EX, not bad. Okay, a lot of options there depending on what you draw, right? Pokeball, draw into, etc., etc. Again, Eevee is going to be the card that you're just going to be like, man, I need something else, Eevee. I can't have just Eevee, right? I can't have just Vaporeon. Like, there has to be, more that this deck has in the first couple of turns. And hopefully the bulk of Articuno helps you, get to those juicier parts of the deck if you need it. And, or hopefully you're just drawing Starmie EX on curve like a boss. All right, so I wanted to show you a couple of fire decks. This is one take on Arcanine that I think is very interesting. It's going to play double Growlithe, double Arcanine, double Moltres, but it's splashing a Mew EX as well. And that Mew EX can help, in your Mewtwo matchup. It can help in your Charizard matchup. And hey, it's also just an extra body that's 1 retreat cost that you can pivot out of the active spot, worst case, right? Soak damage while you build up an Arcanine manually. But again, hopefully you do have those Moltres openers where you're just attaching energies to your Growlithe and then evolving Arcanine. Double Giovanni to try to fix some of your math, double Potion, double Sabrina, and then double Leaf as well to help get out of the active spot, right? So that way you're not burning those energies, pun intended, when you get your Moltres or your Moltres or your Arcanine out of the active sometimes, right? Again, I think that this is a pretty good build. You might have some cards that you want to flex out. Just looking at some of these test hands, again, Moltres and Growlithe, that's great. If anytime that you can open up Moltres and Growlithe, I mean, you're just loving life, right? Here you have the opportunity to find the Moltres. We'll see. Obviously there, again, the opportunity to find the Moltres. Maybe Mew is in the active soaking up damage while you build up that Growlithe. Hey, you're not playing anything but fire energies, so don't worry about having that early Mew attack. But again, I do think that this is a very solid deck, especially with the amount of grass decks that you may see. So the last deck that I want to talk about in this video, and again, I hope that you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think about these decks in the comments, and I hope you hit that subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen so that way you can tune back in for more of my content. But this is going to be just my take on the updated Blaine list. You'll notice I am playing the new Rapidash, but I am still playing the old Ponyta, which again, feel free to change that, right? Feel free to change that. But one of the things that I would point out is the double Giovanni, double Blaine, and that's just to ensure that you can hit that 90 to 100 threshold with your Ninetales, right? You want to deal that 100 damage. Sometimes that's going to fix your math. And then the Blaine is obviously going to be something that you want to have. Like if you have Giovanni and Blaine, if you can use the Giovanni and save the Blaine and still get the knockout, like that's super good, right? Super crucial. So keep that in mind. But again, just a standard Blaine deck for the most part, that Farfetch for that early tempo. But yeah, man, the games that you get Ninetales on curve and you're able to actually send it out with Blaine and just knock out some EXs, you're going to love it, right? But again, very strong one prize deck. Probably one of the better one prize decks that we're going to see for a long time. But this deck is really good if you're going to see a lot of grass decks. But again, hey, the Mewtwo matchup is kind of iffy depending on how fast the Mewtwo goes. If they get Gardevoir on curve, it's going to be tough. But again, hey, Ninetales can fix a lot of problems if you get it on curve. So definitely worth trying out if you are, maybe playing on a budget, maybe you're newer to the game, maybe you just jumped in. Blaine is a great choice for one of your first decks. And obviously, if I was playing in a no EX tournament, I would have to ask myself, should I play Blaine or should I play a deck that beats Blaine? Because again, this deck is going to be really good in that format. But anyways, yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. I hope you guys enjoyed the decks. And hey, that's all I got. Peace.